Hello, today's video is about what is wrong with the alt-right. Where do I differ from the alt-right, etc. Well, if you're a libertarian or on the right, or maybe you're a liberal, but you made the mistake of formulating a deductive thought on a topic publicly, it's likely you've been called alt-right by some leftist or another. Until recently, I really didn't know what that meant, to be honest, but I've watched quite a few speeches and talks from people such as Jared Taylor and Richard Spencer and some others who have been associated with that term, though they probably, to be fair, have other terms for themselves. In all cases, I'm not sure that they accept that term. So I think, having watched all these videos, I have a pretty good grasp of where they're coming from now. And depending on the person, they might be more comfortable with white advocate or even white nationalist. I don't want to mischaracterize them, but I think there are themes that I can associate with them that I don't believe they would contradict. So we'll talk about those as a foundation before I address them. These are people who are aware of scientific findings about relative intelligence among the different races, in addition to other traits. They consider these to be primary factors in the types of societies that the races have built or would build, and that these traits are also the primary factor in crime statistics and in other behaviors that make society worse rather than better to live in. Many, if not most, of the people who ascribe to this philosophy think it's important to have a state or homeland that's primarily white by some means or another. The alt-right, my assessment or my gut feeling from having watched a lot of this is they generally believe in preserving whiteness. Having said that, and before I go into debunking some of their conclusions, it's important to emphasize that I understand where they're coming from. It's a little bit like Chris Rock talking about O.J. Simpson seeing some young white dude driving the sports car he bought for his wife and saying, "I ain't saying he should have killed her, but I understand." Here in 2017 America, the general discourse has become thick with anti-white rhetoric drummed up by the left. It permeates the education system, which we'll detail in a future video. It's all throughout the universities, obviously, and in corporate HR departments, etc. If you're white, you're guilty of unspeakable crimes, apparently, and you can't offer a reasonable opinion on a political matter without getting called a racist or worse by the left. So I get it. Lots of white people are sick and tired of this kind of stuff. It's getting so old and it's so easily debunked. It's a bunch of bullshit from the word go, and it's dangerous to everyone in society. But what concerns and interests me is dispassionate logic. This is the stuff that I think is cool and fun. It's what I do for fun. I like getting to the bottom of things. I don't like workarounds if I can get to the source and solve the problem. And I think this separatist attitude from the white advocates is a workaround to a set of solvable problems. Let's start with where all the anti-white hate is coming from. Is it coming from all the legal Americans of non-white races in a way that suggests that these are the innate or naturally developed views of those people? I don't think that's the case at all. It isn't blackness or Hispanicness that generates these attitudes. They have a definable source. This is obviously an extremely successful set of memes developed by the enemies of individualism and capitalism, not the enemies of white people. It's high IQ, non-black, non-Hispanic, and non-Asian people primarily who have sown these ideas into the lower IQ populations. Every time there's an Antifa-style protest against any pro-capitalist speaker or alt-right speaker for that matter, the communist and socialist signs are everywhere. There are no Martin Luther Kings among the protesters, but there are plenty of Hugo Chavez or Che Guevara's or Bernie Sanders supporters. And it isn't the black owners of YouTube and Facebook and Twitter who are scrambling at all costs to shut down the free speech of the increasingly ubiquitous Trump supporters and America-loving content creators who happen to be black or Hispanic. White people are doing that. White people are the owners of these corporations that are trying their best to snuff out the capitalist, individualist views of people who are non-white. The fact that Black or Hispanic populations have lower average IQs mainly means that in this overall equation, that they are more easily manipulated by leftists. And this is where the major unrest is coming from. So is it the ideal to live in a society of white people or even high IQ people? No, I don't think so. The ideal is to live in a society of good people, whether they have high or low IQs. The alt-right implies that goodness is associated with high IQ. But the fact of the matter is that an evil person with a high IQ can do a lot more damage than an evil person with a low IQ. We don't want either of those people in our society, no matter what color they are. But the alt-right has strong points when they point out the disasters of Detroit and Chicago, the $1 trillion thrown down the welfare hole, which per capita is heavily skewed toward non-whites and illegals. They point out the disastrous public education system, and in general the misery and poverty that seems to be stamped all over many non-white run communities. They say, look, this is what happens when you attempt to have a racially integrated society, and therefore we should have a place for whites to run the way whites want it to be run. But that's a workaround, in my opinion. It's not a solution. The solution was already created, and it's called the Constitution of the United States. The only thing that's necessary to have prevented all of the ugliness that the alt-right attributes to race mixing is to follow that Constitution. Consider further that any person who takes an oath to uphold the Constitution, to uphold the Constitution and then sets about to subvert it, is by definition guilty of treason. Of course, the Constitution was not followed, and treason is commonplace. But we have to consider, for sake of argument, what features would not exist in the United States if the Constitution were followed, which is what we're going to do right now. I'll justify all of these claims in upcoming videos where I detail the functionality of the Constitution. But let's consider first the most basic tenet of the Constitution, that no law can be made that respects an establishment of religion. The way this has been interpreted has been extremely weak. But Madison's view is a strong one. It's that this means that religion is wholly exempt from the cognizance of the institution of civil society. That's from his Memorial and Remonstrance Against Religious Assessment speech to the Virginia Assembly. So check that out. Jefferson described the separation of church and state. He described the First Amendment as a separation of church and state. But what this means mathematically is that every law must stand to reason. It can't be based in some kind of dogmatic belief, no matter how many people hold that belief. It has to stand to reason. The Constitution runs on reason and dissipates when reason is ignored. Also, the purpose of that law is stated in the preamble very clearly. It's unambiguous. Law must secure the blessings of liberty. That's why it exists. If the law isn't doing that, and if it doesn't make sense, it's unconstitutional. It's as simple as that. So if we keep this in mind, while we look at what's going on in the United States, we can see what aspects of the U.S. would not exist if the Constitution were followed. The first large block to fall away is, of course, the welfare state. In a nation governed under the Constitution, there's no such thing at any level of government as a person receiving a subsidy for living expenses stolen from someone else for any reason. If the government has to step in because you can't feed your child, you're a criminal in that system. Your child or children, in that case, have to be taken away from you. They're going to be raised in government facilities augmented by charity while you live in a cell and work in private jobs, not state jobs, toward achieving your freedom and reclaiming your family. You're not allowed, one way or another, to have any more children until you have a square balance sheet with your fellow man. So the main source of this inner city violence can't exist in a Constitution-based society. And this is, of course, single mothers getting paid by the leftist state to produce fatherless children. Those fathers would be located as well, and they would live in a cell and likewise not be permitted to father any children until their bills are paid by their work. Any charitable cause is free to take responsibility for these people and to take them out of the system by paying off their debt. But no free man can be forced under the Constitution to subsidize the life of another person simply because they failed without having a right to prevent further crimes committed by that individual. Without the welfare state, there is no significant problem with illegal immigration. Under the Constitution, of course, we have the right to choose those who live among us. But we don't need to choose them necessarily on the basis of IQ, but on the basis of whether they are fundamentally oriented toward a capitalist-free society. Nobody who fits that description wants to live off their fellow man through welfare payments. If no welfare is offered by the state, the problem is largely solved from an immigration standpoint. What else would not exist under the Constitution? Public funding of education. This one is a big one, and I'll be devoting a series of videos to that topic alone in the future. But there is no justification under the Constitution for destroying the free market in educational products and services to have a collective system. Every parent has the responsibility to feed, clothe, shelter, and educate his or her own offspring. Forcing someone else to pay for it at gunpoint through confiscatory property taxes is unconstitutional, period. Another huge problem that couldn't exist under the Constitution is drug prohibition. I'll focus, of course, on that question in detail in another video as well. But this underground industry has been the cause for so much gang-related violence by inner-city young non-white men. If the Constitution were followed, these people would face 3 options like every other American. Starve to death, clean up your act enough to hold a job, or spend life in a solitary cell designed for one purpose, to transition you to self-sufficiency at your expense. Reality is an amazing attitude adjuster. Most of us know this firsthand, of course. I've seen a lot of people helped by stark reality in my life, but I've never seen anyone helped by a bailout. It's just throwing good money after bad and kicking the can down the road in every case. In short, under the Constitution, the individual's right to his freedom and his pursuit of happiness takes precedence over the needs of someone who is failing to take care of himself or his children successfully. All forms of private compassion and charity can be brought into service for such people, but one thing will not happen under the Constitution. A free individual will not be forced to help you through taxation, period, except through one uniform and transparent process: the criminal justice system. You don't get a subsidy for failing to take care of yourself. The ugly realities we face in this country are not caused by the mixing of race. All of this ugly reality we see in America now is the result of something called democracy. Democracy is treason against the constitutional republic known as the United States of America. Without this treason, we would already have a society that white people would be comfortable to live in, and one in which the whites would be comfortable living amongst the non-whites who also thrive in conditions where self-sufficiency is non-negotiable with the government. The alt-right often point out that people are more comfortable with their own race, regardless of race. That's fair, I think, but people are also interested in being around and meeting people who don't look the same. They're interested in food that has different origins. They're interested in peaceful cultural traditions and practices that challenge or enhance the culture they already know. The truth is that historically people have been tribal, and the United States turned that on its head by law. If you are an American, you will be judged as an individual. And individualism is a relatively new thing for human beings, especially for lower average IQ people. In this new type of culture, I don't think it's as much that people are more comfortable with their own race in a tribal sense that separates them from other races, as that people are often insular in general, and a huge percentage of people only have small circles of friends, of close friends anyway. And when you have just a few close friends, it's highly probable that these are racially similar, just because of the sample size. Let's take my personal experience. I've actually primarily only dated women who are different racially than I. My longest term girlfriend was Asian for many years, and another was Hispanic. I wasn't trying to pollute my pristine whiteness by dating these women. I dated them because I thought they were hot. My closest circle of male friends are the same ones I've known all my life, and I can count them on one hand. They are all white. But my wider circle of friends certainly includes black guys that are close enough that I always say hello to them and buy them a shot if I see them at the bar or something. I'm not expressing friendship to these guys because I'm trying to improve race relations. It's because I like them as individuals. Everybody is fucked in the leftist con race game. You can't be Jewish or white or black or Hispanic or even Asian without all the leftist stereotypes pinned on your back. You have to carry this shit around with you because of leftists. It's a testament, I think, to how willing we are to live together as individuals in a capitalist society that we see through all of that shit in large numbers. And the alt-right isn't helping that. Though I certainly welcome their pushback on the leftist anti-white propaganda. They just need to do a much better job of identifying who's responsible for that propaganda, and it's the leftists of all colors, but especially white. I can't count the brilliant content creators on YouTube leading up to the Trump election and after who happen to be non-whites who favor freedom and capitalism and who know exactly what these white or black leftists have been up to, and they're damn loud about it. If YouTube doesn't shut them up pretty soon, all of those impressionable blacks who have been duped by the Marxist propaganda machine are going to start getting a different impression, and that's been happening quickly. Without blacks and Hispanics, furthermore, voting for Trump in surprisingly large numbers compared to previous Republican candidates, we would be suffering Hillary Clinton even more than we still are. Alt-right, I empathize with your position, but I don't want to segregate myself from people who aren't white. I want to segregate myself from people who aren't right. This starts with exposing the left as evil, exposing leftist politicians who take the oath of office as treasonous, and demanding an interpretation of the Constitution that demands the security and liberty in all aspects of American life. And this means free markets in every market except defense. Thanks.